I want to welcome all of you to this Societe de Chimie Industrielle webcast featuring John Televantos, who is a very well-known private equity partner at Arsenal Capital, on a very, very interesting topic. We have a lot of people who registered for this about what private equity, how it's evolving, but also at the end we'll talk about what effect the coronavirus crisis is having. Uh, However, before we start, I just want to say that, Societe de Chimie Industrielle, I'm on the board and this year happen to be president. We're very proud of the whole series of monthly luncheon speeches and also webcasts that we have done really on topics that we feel are important to members of the chemical industry and life science industry community. This is one of them. Of course, the ratio of webcasts to luncheons has shifted a bit now that we're all sheltering at home. And I think that's going to continue until it's safe for us all to gather for lunches and so forth. But I also want to mention that we're very proud of the scholarship programs that we have, funding research for students studying chemistry, chemical engineering, and biotechnology, as well as the mentor programs that we have, and a whole variety of efforts that we have really to try to serve the industry. And those of you who are members, we're very pleased that you're members and participate. And those of you who are not members, we encourage you to become members for a small annual fee, but it also gives you access to a lot of things such as recordings of events, etc., and lists of who attended different events, which you might find quite useful, and discounts to the luncheon events. Before we get started, I want to announce an event that was not on our official calendar, but we decided about two days ago to do, and that is on Wednesday, April 22nd. So next week, we are going to have a panel featuring Dr. Kevin Swift and myself. And as you know, Kevin is the chief economist of the American Chemistry Council on the topic of the coronavirus crisis, the business and financial impact on the chemical industry. It will be held at 11 o'clock East Coast time on Wednesday, April 22nd. And this was arranged very quickly because we had many, many members who said, we loved Kevin Swift's webcast in February about, at that time, it was mainly China and what the impact would be. We would love an update to talk about what the current situation is. But we're going to focus on what's the current state of the medical and economic situation, how it's affecting the business and financial health of the chemical industry, what are chemical companies doing to try to deal with the current crisis, but also what are the likely future economic and financial scenarios that we're facing, and how will those scenarios play out with regard to chemical industry dynamics. So the invitation will be going out shortly, and I think for many of you, I hope you will join us, because I think these are issues that are very important to all of us. So with that, I'm just very pleased that John agreed to speak today. He has been one of the most active private equity investors in the chemical industry, and they've had an extraordinary track record. And what's interesting, and I think one of the reasons why we wanted to speak, is they have evolved the private equity model in ways to really add additional value that wasn't true 20 or 30 years ago, right? 20, 30 years ago, you bought a business, just had to have steady cash flow, you put debt on it, you walked away, and at some point, you sold the business. That has changed very dramatically for all private equity, but also has really changed a lot for those people investing in the chemical industry. What we like to do in this session is as follows. We're going to conduct this as a fireside chat. John and I have agreed on the questions, and we'll start a little bit about his own background, because it's very important to where he is today. We'll talk about his view of the evolution of the private equity industry and then their investment philosophy. But we'll make sure that we spend at the end plenty of time talking about what he sees as the coronavirus challenge and how that's going to change the private equity landscape. We'll do that for about 25 or 30 minutes. But we were going to reserve plenty of time for those of you who are online to ask questions. Before we start, though, I want to say there are two ways you can ask a question. One is a very familiar way, which is there's a chat box, which you'll see on your screen. And if you click on that and type in your question, both John and I'll be able to see it. The other is a Q&A function, and that also is one where you type in your question, and has slightly different features, but essentially they're somewhat similar. So by the way, if you happen to think of a question while we're still doing the fireside chat, please type it in, and it'll go into the queue, and we'll address it when we get to the Q&A, or you can wait until we get to the Q&A session. So let's start. So John, it's very interesting. You have an interesting background in terms of how you got into private equity, somewhat different from many of the people, because a lot of the people in private equity started out in investment banking as opposed to operating and so forth. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about sort of your own early part of your career, and then how it ended up evolving into the private equity industry.
Sure, Peter. First of all, thank you for your continued leadership in the sector. You have been unquestionably the most significant leader that gets us all together, takes a lot of your available time to do this on a pro bono basis, and it is highly appreciated and highly impactful. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webcast. This is a little strange for all of us to participate this way, and we all hope that you're all safe and that soon we'll be back to work and enjoying life as we should be. I'm going to start with what Peter said, that the private equity industry has evolved over time. It really was started as a way of leveraging cash flows and then creating stronger companies to be sold. But that industry has been quite successful and therefore attracted a lot of capital and people, and is now much more competitive. I was born in Cyprus, a small island of the Mediterranean of Greek descent. And I was fortunate to be given the opportunity to get a scholarship to go to London, finish high school, and then chose to study chemical engineering at Imperial College, which is a very strong university for chemical engineering. And I was recruited by Union Carbide from college to come to the US. They wanted to have a diversity of ideas, some European trained people to help them in research. So I started in research at Union Carbide, which is now part of Dow Chemical, and progressed through research to lead a technical center in Charleston, West Virginia. My business unit was sold to Arco Chemical, so I moved to Arco Chemical, which is now part of LyondellBasell, and moved to become vice president of development for the company, which was subsequently sold. And then at the time, I chose to move from LyondellBasell to Hercules Inc., which is now part of Ashland. So you can see that all the companies I worked for in the past no longer exist. They're part of other entities, and then became CEO of a downstream business in the polyurethane space called Fomex International. And in 2005, I was invited to join this nascent private equity firm, Arsenal Capital, that was founded by a few people with an objective of being industry focused and differentiated in that it had a mixture of industry people like myself, operating people, and investment people, feeling that the combination and collaboration of those functions would lead to better outcomes. And 15 years later, at least in the chemical space, we've done pretty well, as you said, Peter. We have made more than 100 acquisitions, have exited more than 20 platforms, and have had a very good return of the invested capital to our investors. So that's my past, and we now have a team of industry operating and professional people that are from an investment banking and investment background. It's a big group, and it's a very team-oriented effort So I don't want to take much credit for where we are, other than being part of this very talented group of individuals that have this focus on investing wisely in the chemical sector. And our theme and investment focus is primarily, as you suggested earlier, to build strategically important companies. To start off with platforms in sectors that we feel have the opportunity to grow faster, typically with a technology content that we can understand and believe we can exploit further. And then in most cases, bolting on strategic assets to them to make them stronger so that they can become in a niche sector. We're not in commodity chemicals, we're only in specialty chemicals and materials, downstream materials, to build a company that is strategically more important, larger. Typically, we build them 4 to 10 times bigger than we start, and then to become very attractive to both financial and, most importantly, strategic buyers.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because there are so many private equity firms today, and some actually have some industry specialization, some are generalists and so forth. They're really, wide variety. But certainly, part of the story is how do you make yourself unique, right? Because like anything, any business you're in, you have to be better at a number of important things to really succeed. Has that sort of evolved over the last 15 years while you're at Arsenal? Do you feel that where the value added has to be has changed from 2005 until today?
Yeah, I think it has, even though some of the same elements of value creation still exist. I think in the early days, it was underperforming assets, operational excellence, and then turning it to be acquired or IPO'd in the public markets, and those are typically the larger assets. Now it's a lot more strategic reposition on our companies. And yes, operational excellence can add to that in a way, but it's a lot more about repositioning companies so that it is a growth entity, because nobody wants to buy stagnant or shrinking companies. Or if they do, the value they give you does not create any returns for the investors.
Yeah. It's interesting. I actually started out at Bain & Company fixing chemical and life science companies for many years. And then I had a period of time where I was in private equity with the Whitney family. And one of the things I learned, which is going to be part of my question, was don't forget what your role is as a shareholder and board member versus if you are running the business. You have to be very careful about that. And I think it gets harder the more you have people who are partners of the private equity firms who have tremendous operating experience and so forth, because it's so much easier for you to feel that you have to sort of uh, uh, tell the management you have to do this or that or whatever. How is that? And I think particularly in situations like now when there's a lot of stress. So as that has happened, how do you how have you managed the role between the investor and board member and management? Ultimately, the board chooses who the CEO should be, but at the end of the day, if you choose a CEO, you have to give them a certain amount of latitude and freedom to operate the business.
Absolutely. I'm going to start back a step and to say the biggest learning I had in moving from a company, from an operating company, to private equity is the power of collaboration between interested, smart people. When I was CEO, everybody around me made me feel that all my decisions were right and I couldn't do any wrong. And it's very
that's
typical.
because it was true, right, John?
It is so typical of many environments where, whether you're the president of a country or you are a CEO of a company, you get what I call CEO-itis, meaning people are afraid to tell you where maybe you're wrong. And that if you have people that you trust and admire working with you, you end up making better decisions most of the time than if you went with your gut or your knowledge, because we always have gaps in our understanding and knowledge. And I try to apply that learning when we interact with our management teams. And it's really working well, because if the management team is willing to collaborate, they realize that there's a lot of things they don't know, whether it's on the finance side or on the strategy side, or even specifically if you're a downstream small business, you don't understand the power of certain processes and systems, technologies, and so on. And our role is to communicate, educate, support, and then find groups that can help them, whether it's outside consultants or engineers or other talent that can help bridge the gap. We don't do the work for them. We bring resources to help them. But if the management team is not willing to accept input and help, then you're right, we're not going to do the work for them. Typically, that management team needs to be upgraded.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. There are many people who have who say that that good CEOs are not just good CEOs generically. They may be good CEOs, but they may only be good CEOs in certain situations, right? And so people who are good at startups, by the way, are typically very, very bad at restructuring a company that needs cost reduction. It is very common for CEOs who have been running companies that are 50, 100 million to fail miserably when when they're put into companies that are much larger, for example, right? So I suspect that's a very critical component of your own decisions about what CEOs to put in, because often you buy a business, but there's a change at the CEO level. It's sometimes required, right? Because the founder
As
is,
a private company, they
yeah,
want to retire. Clearly, that's a requirement. And when they do want to stay on for a while, it's a mixed result, as you say, because many of the CEOs, if they're founders of a company, they're used to having everything their own way, and they don't realize gaps that they have. They want to accept them.
right.
The typical behavior is we always used to do it this way, so there's no desire to spend the energy to understand what else is possible and change. So you're right, it's a challenge. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah. So so when you're looking for CEOs, and you actually acquire businesses of various different types, right? And they're not just, private founder, owned companies. You do carve outs from large companies and so forth. So does that sort of change who, you try to put in as CEOs when you have to put a new
Yeah, and
CEO?
we don't have a cookie cutter approach to that. If we're carving out a business from a public entity, and we've done that many times, we find that, and we like to find, talent within the division that then we can support them become full-fledged CEOs, but providing all the functional support and education to make them CEOs. And those people usually thrive tremendously when they see that their business that's typically not strategic to the company that's selling it, not only is not strategic, it is the only company. And the energy level that is created between that group and the level of management and even employees all the way down, when they know that the results is what they in fact can touch and impact, we've seen tremendous value creation from that alone. So that's our preference. If we carve out a business, that we find the best talent and give them the responsibility and enable them to grow up, because all of us didn't start as CEOs. We started through the ranks growing. So that is a very successful model we've practiced. But that's not always the case, because many times the talent that is left in the carve-outs is not strong enough. So we need to go find people that have experience, relevance in the sector, because if they're totally irrelevant, they can be very mechanical in their approach. So understanding, if you get a commodity experienced executive, to make them be a specialty chemicals or materials driven guy takes significant conversion. And so those are the things we don't have time for. I mean, we cannot take a CEO that may need 2 years to develop, because that's almost half of our value creation period in training. So we prefer to get experienced people, but there's always gaps, because we always continue to learn.
Yeah.
And we're very happy to help them develop and support them to do so.
Yeah, and also, I guess this is a good segue to the last question. And it's interesting. Probably not a single CEO in your portfolio has had to go through the current experience, right? It's so different. it's not the same as 2008 and 2009
It is
and
not.
so forth. So this is probably a real test of how resilient your CEOs are, right? And the partners of your firm, right? Because this is not a repeat of any other kind of crisis that we've been through.
Yes, it's amazing. I'm sure that what we've done is similar to what public companies and other private equity firms have done. But really, day one, that we decided that the risk was too great to work out of the New York office, that we started almost daily communications with all our portfolio companies and set certain communications pattern of what to look for the signposts, look at safety of our employees first, issues of operability, compliance with regulations, and so on. And it's been challenging, very intense communications and effort, both within the partnership and between the deal teams and each portfolio company. And it's worked well. And we've categorized our companies over the last few weeks into ones that are benefiting from this, companies in healthcare packaging, for instance, and a couple of other companies that I won't state their names, companies which is more like 70% of our portfolio that have the balance sheet to withstand what's likely to happen over the coming months. And then we have a couple of companies that are challenged. And those were the ones that were close to being challenged before this crisis, so they need more liquidity. And like many other companies, we have immediately went to add as much liquidity through a revolver as we could, because there will be cash needs in the business for the short term. And then ensure that we focus the company in the right way to take advantage of opportunities. We have a business that sells products direct to consumers, and that business is flourishing 70% up, that segment of the business,
Yeah,
as
right.
opposed to the industrial side that's way down.
Well, John, I congratulate you that you don't own any cruise lines or airlines or movie movie houses. That's probably very fortunate for you, right?
Now, that was through great planning.
You like movies, but you don't want to own them, right? The that actually is an important point, because reality is, as everyone knows, the impact from a business point of view uh, varies dramatically depending upon what business you're in and what industry you're in. And I think that from one end, the extreme, which is anything that's entertainment or restaurant, so forth, which is, most people are facing revenues of zero, right? To people on the very far end. Would you agree that chemicals sort of somewhere in the middle, I gather, because, it's got some issues that in fact are affected, but other things that are, not as dramatically negative, right?
Very much so. I think the uncertainty is how the overall economy would evolve. And of course, government action has a big impact this time, a lot bigger than ever before. Government action can have a big impact on demand on certain chemicals. For instance, if indeed, which we firmly believe, the government will make heavy investments in infrastructure, because a lot of displaced service employees will need work. And it's a way of putting people back to work. Not necessarily ideal, but it's a lot easier to create those jobs rather than create demand in restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
because most of us are probably going to shy away from going to restaurants for a while longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can have an impact, of course, on the chemical industry in a big way. A lot of chemicals and materials are supplied to the construction industry, the infrastructure sector, and that can have an impact that we can't predict. But if there is a significant recession or near depression for a couple of years, then every aspect of the economy pretty much will be adversely affected, including chemicals.
Yeah. One of the big problems right now, of course, is people are having a really hard time trying to predict what the future is going to look like, right?
Yeah.
And I suspect that has affected how you're managing the portfolio companies and their balance sheets and so forth. So how have you had to deal with that? Because, last time in 2008, 2009, it was a very narrow kind of crisis. And at least you had some idea of what the impact would be. Here, obviously, both the impact and how long is very, very difficult to predict. So how have you dealt with that as you've tried to manage, your portfolio companies?
Yeah, well, we categorize our companies again based on which ones are at risk, which ones are fine, and which ones just the liquidity is enough for. And some of the companies, the few that have real challenges, the question is how much more liquidity or infusion of money do we give them, because we have a lot of dry powder on our balance sheet to support our companies, unlike public companies that have to go to the public markets, which are not very open right now. I think the big question is what we discussed a minute ago. Government action here can have a big impact on what happens. So we are planning for a number of scenarios, and the likelihood in our mind is that the leaders of the world will have no choice but to get the economies back to work in the next few weeks. There may be other issues that come up a few months from now as the virus recontaminates segments of the population, but I think people will be more careful, and we'll see how the reaction from governments will be. But it is an unknown, and you have to plan scenarios. The good thing is, with enough dry powder, you can protect the companies that you feel have sustainable, durable value and opportunities to grow. And we are fortunate to have the majority of our companies be in that category.
Yeah. Well, the majority of the CEOs that we work with here at Younger Partners, their attitude is prepare for the possibility of the worst, but hope for better. And I think that sounds like your philosophy as well, which is make sure that you're protected in the worst scenario, but hope that it'll be better, and don't do anything that's so drastic that you compromise the business. So is your feeling that maybe this is more a situation that might ease up in the next couple of months versus, some people are saying, things may not get better until the end of the summer or the early fall?
Yeah, I don't know that I can make that precise a prediction. My worry
Hmm.
is that we may have a resurgence in demand from all the pent-up demand that has been denied to people over the last several weeks, but that there is a risk of a global recession that may be with us for a couple of years, whose magnitude I cannot predict.
Right.
But that's the sort of more likely worst scenario that we are working under and looking at our portfolio companies and living our lives, because it's unlikely this will not have scars for a while.
Mhm. You're fortunate to have plenty of capital, in terms of your fund and so forth. Uh, is your plan, do you believe that the best thing is to hold off during this period of time where there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of new investments? Or do you see this maybe also as an opportunity, some special opportunities to buy things because of the crisis?
Yeah, definitely the latter. We're looking for opportunities both to add to our portfolio, because we have a portfolio of businesses that can benefit from accretive acquisitions that fit strategic needs of those companies. So we're active. We've already made 2 acquisitions as we speak during this time.
Mm-hmm.
One was more a merger, but still had requirements for capital in the water space. And we think water is not going to decline much during this period of time, as a lot of packaging will not decline, pharmaceutical packaging, and then another business that we acquired that was in the electronics adhesive space. So we're active on the smaller scale, but we're also looking at bigger opportunities in the coming months
Yeah.
as this becomes a little clearer.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, yeah, the water side definitely is a stable, relatively stable business, because when you think about the end uses, whether it's municipal or residential, whatever, people don't stop using water, right? And
Yes, exactly.
so and there's so many different sectors within water that are possible areas where you can invest. Well, there's certainly then there are certainly some private equity firms like Apollo that look at the opportunities for things like distressed debt and so forth. which is a whole different category. But
different category, different skills. I think you have to be competent in the trading side of the distressed debt, and it's not something we're competent, and we're not likely to gain the competence right now with all the other firms that have that capability today.
Yeah, that's right. So, so you got your portfolio that you're managing. You know the ones that are difficult and having difficulty and so forth. Are there other things that private equity firms should be doing that they're not doing in terms of being able to get through this period that are not traditional? Because this is a non-traditional, situation, right?
Yeah. Of course, initially, of course, and continue to have greater focus on the safety of our employees. So we've implemented both rigorous and extensive change in operating mode of the cleansing, distancing, PPE equipment for our employees, so that those that have to work to produce goods that are critical to the economy are doing it safely. And so far we've done pretty well because of those measures. Hopefully that will continue. And then it's a matter of being very vigilant and knowing what's happening on a daily basis, because things are changing enough. We've, as I mentioned, one company, we have repositioned to sell a lot more online now, products that we're selling through retail channels. And that had dramatic impact, positive impact to that company. And so those are the steps that we see. What other opportunities do we have to reposition companies during this period? And that will evolve over time. We cannot predict all the challenges and opportunities that are coming in front of us, but we are being both humbled and open-minded of how to respond.
Well, and there's certainly some structural changes that will be permanent, right? I think this is not just a situation where there'll be a recovery and at some point we'll be back to normal things. Because I think this is, because it's so global and because it involves supply chain and because it involves how consumers behave and how they buy things, we're going to find some permanent structural changes about how business is done that weren't true, a year ago. And that's going to be an opportunity too, both an opportunity but also a threat. Certainly retail, this is just an even worse problem, right, for them, because the more people get used to buying things online, they don't just go back to where they were before, right? And so that's going to affect a lot of companies out there. Would you agree?
Totally. I agree with that. The other thing that may have collateral damage is office space.
Right.
Because as we get to understand how to operate remotely as teams with all the enabled tools that we have, that most of us didn't really use very much, like the one we're using today, we will learn that expensive office space in New York doesn't need to be as large or even there at all. So I think there may be collateral damage to commercial and office space requirements in the future. And acceleration of direct to consumer and more challenge to that. The other worry that I have is that maybe permanent scars on some segments of the economy after we get through this. For instance, small business owners in the service sector, restaurants, taxis. I mean, the businesses that today are devastated, they're not going to be as willing to take a lot of debt or risk in their businesses in the future. They're going to be much more careful about saving and not spending. So similar to the effects that we had in the Great Depression, there may be a segment of the economy, if this is prolonged, that will, have different behaviors for a long time.
Yeah, actually, if you, many of us know people who were grew up during the Depression, right? There are a few of them now, but those of us who are not 20 years old know a lot of people who went through the Depression, and it permanently affected how they behaved
That's right.
and so forth. By the way, I will comment, because we do do chemicals and life sciences and stuff in between. We happen to have some experts who really know what's going on the science side of this crisis. And I'll just make one or two comments. part of the reason why all this is unknown about the future is, one, they don't know if you have been infected and you recover, whether your body really is immune to another attack.
That's right.
They
Yeah.
just don't know that. And now there's some evidence in China that perhaps some people who got it and then they got rid of it and then they tested negative, now they have it again. And that's causing people to worry a lot. And the other is the particular type, this particular virus is one because you don't have to have symptoms and yet be able to infect people, whether whether it really can break this cycle, right, of infecting other people, and whether we're just going to have 2 or 3 waves, right, of the problem where we start to
That's
loosen
right.
up, people start to go back to factories and so forth, but then we get the wave. So this is what makes it particularly difficult. It's very different from Ebola or SARS, where if you had it, you were immune and you didn't get it again, right? So it's going to be very, very interesting. But as Dr. Fossey said, he highly recommends that no one shake hands anymore forever, right? So
maybe I was wondering if somehow the Japanese and Indian cultures developed no handshakes as a result of viruses that happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
right, no, that could be true. Could be true. So what I'd like to do is now turn it to the audience, because we have a couple of questions here that people have posed. And all right, and I'm just going to go through a couple of them. So there's one from Bruce Orr, and he says, John, tell us about the longer term investment strategy shift from specialty chemicals to downstream formulated products. What's worked, what hasn't? Thanks, Bruce.
Hey, Bruce, thank you for being on this webcast. I haven't seen you in a while, but you're always a friend. And thank you for your interest. We have shifted to formulated products as an opportunity to invest some years ago for 2 reasons. One, the industry is much more fragmented. A lot of entrepreneurs started businesses, and a great number of companies that we could then use consolidation as a way of creating larger, stronger companies. The second one is formulated products are typically regional product companies, and they have great closeness with their customers and markets, and so they're not as affected by imports. It is very difficult for an adhesives customer to buy the same adhesives and have the interaction with a supplier to fit a specific need. So those are the reasons that we've invested more heavily in coatings, adhesives and sealants, polyurethanes, and a number of other subsegments of the economy, and we will continue to do that. We already own 4 companies that are in the space that do formulated products for different markets. The last one being a company called Seal for Life that does protection of pipes, primarily in infrastructure, in highly challenging environments, even submarine environments. So all of that has given us the desire to continue to invest there. We'll continue to find opportunities, so we will not stop.
So John, I think part of it though is because of the size deal that you focus on, obviously you have to go into segments where it's possible to buy $100-200 million business, but built by a company that's got a good position, right? As opposed to ones where it's so consolidated that unless you're 800 or $1 billion in sales, you can't be successful. Is that part of this?
That is a small consideration. I think the bigger consideration is the opportunity to create a lot more value and the protection of the margins and revenue of the company from inexpensive imports. I think those are the 2 drivers that have given us the focus to invest in the sector.
So we have a question from someone whose name is 806-989-947. So whoever that is, that's their phone number, I guess. Now that we have seen the dramatic business impact of the pandemic, what thoughts do you have on valuation premium, if any, for businesses that are considered as essential versus not essential? Thanks in advance.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the market will value those businesses more. It always did. That businesses that have sustainability through these challenges will be valued more. The second question that perhaps you didn't ask is, how do we see valuation changing from the sort of full value that we've been living in for the last several years, not just the chemical industry, in all of industry, as a result of very poor alternatives for people to put their money in. I mean, fixed income returns were almost zero. The bond returns were not good. So equity was a better place to put money. So valuations of both public and private company equities rose significantly. And the feeling that we had a fairly stable and growing economy was the final factor. So we will see how that develops, but it is likely that there will be a change. Certainly the chemical industry today, on a historic basis, the public companies are valued at dramatic discounts to what they should be valued, but it's because people don't know what the next few months of earnings are going to be, and we'll see how that adjusts.
So do you think net, do you think the M&A market will soften in terms of valuations? Because you have a whole bunch of things happening. You have sellers who are pulling things off the market because they say this is not a good time to sell. But then we have sellers who, because they have a financial need, they say, I've got to sell something in order to survive liquidity. And then you have buyers who've retreated who say, I want to focus on my business. I don't have the time, to buy. So buyers falling off, but others who are saying that here's an opportunity, depending upon the situation, to be a buyer. So how do you think that will all net out, in the end?
Well, there will be exceptions to what I will say, but I think in general, most people, including us, that we had businesses that were ready to be sold, will pull them back to the market because the market cannot value them effectively. Mm-hmm. And when they can't value them effectively, they will value them less. So people will hold off until we clear and see the other side of this, at least with greater clarity. At the same time, the debt providers are being very cautious. The debt markets have essentially shut down. Both the cost of debt and availability of debt will be challenging until the market clears out. But there is a tremendous overhang of liquidity, certainly in private equity. And so for good companies, I think once we're on the other side of this, I suspect that valuations will still be robust. Businesses that can withstand these events and they have growth prospects will still be desirable, and there will be transactions, albeit at a much lower space.
Third question from Thomas Mahoney. Says, arguably no industry is more in the crosshairs of environmental activism these days than the chemical industry. Coupled with the increase in ESG focus among private equity limited partners, how does Arsenal conduct environmental audits in your perspective in current portfolio companies? Finally, a question that's not involving the pandemic, so that's good, right?
It is good. I think over my career, I've seen so many changes to public and government regulations for the chemical industry, and this is just another evolution of that. We don't think that this is the end of it or the end of the world. I think the companies around the world are dealing with ESG effectively over time, and it's now become part of our business life. So it is already embedded in the processes that we apply and operate both within the firm and also within our portfolio. So we don't see that as a challenge anymore. In terms of environmental activism, yes, there are spotty challenges, but you must not forget what happened with asbestos and silicone breast implants and many others in the past. So as long as there is opportune lawyers that are looking to make money, they're not going to go, they're not going to disappear. There's always going to be these challenges to our industry, whether it's PFOA or other things that are going to affect how we protect and manage our businesses. And some of them are going to be surprises, and unfortunately, we can't always predict those. But a lot of our businesses are formulated products businesses. So we don't have the scale of environmental impact in manufacturing our products that many of the upstream businesses. So we're not as challenged with some of these changes as other companies are.
Yeah. Well, we have some other questions, but interesting enough, the ones that I see here actually ended up answered as a result of your answering a different question. One was, you know, how much money are you deploying and so forth. So that was answered. So I think we have run through the questions that we had, and I really want to really thank John for for agreeing to be the speaker. I think this was very timely for a lot of people, and obviously there was very high interest by the number of people who registered and who were online. I do want to say that we are going to have this, this is being recorded, and it's going to be available to members. One other good reason to be a member, right? Through our website portal for those who want to watch. It's going to be like Netflix, John. People want to watch it 2 or 3 times, right? Right? But they can't binge watch because there's only one episode, right? So, so that's the most unfortunate part, right? But so I just want to let all of you know in the next couple of days, it will be available for people to watch. But I think this has been a really excellent. I want to thank you, John, for really agreeing to do this, but also some very, very thoughtful answers at a period which is very challenging, for all of us. So thank you very much. And the last thing I want to say is, those of you who feel an affinity towards the mission of Societe de Chimie Industrielle, please become a member, get involved, be on committees. And then also I encourage all of you, because many of you who are on this will be interested in the April 22nd webcast with Kevin Swift and myself on the business and financial impact on chemicals of the coronavirus crisis. So thank you all, and thank you, John. And John,
My
all
pleasure,
I can say
Peter.
is the challenge is you're one of the few Greek friends I have who doesn't have a name that's got 25 letters in it, right?
or owns a diner, and I'm sorry about both of those. But I did want to thank you and the team that was listening. Remember, though, we are supporting and enabling a very critical industry, and we're going to get through to the other end, and our industry is going to be as critical as ever to solve the problems. Remember, even the pharmaceuticals that are being produced require the chemistry and the processes of knowledge that we have, and our industry will do fine.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you all, and I thank everyone in the audience. So I hope you found this helpful.